Now, it's of course entirely expected that the hero will triumph over the villain in an overwhelming majority of movies, using their resolve and sheer strength of will to overcome sometimes pretty overwhelming odds. Yet there are also times when, by all rights, the villain really should have won, and had the story been taking place in real life, they almost certainly would have. And that's what we're here to talk about today, as I'm Jules, this is Whatculture.com, and these are 10 movies where the villain botched an easy win. Number 10. Simon Gruber, Die Hard with a Vengeance. You'd think that battling a chronically hungover hero would actually be the easiest thing in the world for a smart and organised villain, but in the case of Die Hard with a Vengeance as Simon Gruber, it ironically ended up being his undoing. Down-and-out hero John McClane is attempting to foil Gruber whilst fending off the mother of all hangovers, and several times throughout the film verbally mentions his desire to pop a couple of aspirin, and right at the end of the movie, when Gruber has McClane and Zeus tied up on a tanker, McClane asks him for an aspirin. Believing there couldn't possibly be any harm in it, Gruber throws him a bottle and even charitably tells him to keep it. But this small act ultimately ruins Gruber, as once McClane and Zeus escape the tanker, McClane reads the aspirin bottle and finds out where Gruber purchased the item, a truck stop in Quebec. McClane quickly passes on this information to the NYPD, who promptly swarmed the nearby warehouse where Gruber is holed up, leading to Gruber's men being captured and Gruber's own death whilst attempting to escape. After pulling off a stunning heist and facing off against an enemy who was physically and mentally beaten, Gruber undid it all because of a damn bottle of aspirin. Number 9. Two-Face, Batman Forever. Even though Batman and Robin managed to foil the Riddler at the end of Batman Forever, it really didn't matter given that they were still held at gunpoint by Two-Face with nowhere to go. All Two-Face had to do to rid Gotham of its saving grace was pop a cap in the heroes and also Batman's love interest Dr. Chase Meridian for good measure. But instead he waited around and let Batman remind him of his compulsive need to flip a coin for every life or death decision he made. And so Two-Face flips his trusty coin, at which point Batman throws a handful of coins at him, causing him to lose his balance while trying to spot his own coin and promptly falling to his death. Given that Two-Face had evidently forgot about his whole coin flip gambit until Batman reminded him, he was literally seconds away from pumping the heroes full of lead and becoming Gotham's ruling crime lord. Number 8. Debbie Jelinski, Addams Family Values. Though Addams Family Values villain Debbie Jelinski is undeniably unhinged, it's also made abundantly clear that she's a successful serial killer who murdered both her parents and her 2 prior husbands. And in the film's climax, Debbie has the Addams clan dead to rights, forcing them at shotgun point to strap themselves to a series of connected electric chairs which she will use to execute the whole lot of them. But Debbie made 2 mistakes which ultimately caused her downfall. First and foremost, she didn't include the youngest Addams, Hubert, in her plan, instead leaving him in his crib. Apparently killing a baby is just one step too far, but the rest of the family, including Wednesday and Pugsley, well, that's totally fair game apparently. But Hubert ends up escaping his crib and through an hilariously implausible set of circumstances makes it to his family, where he reroutes the electric cables to electrocute Debbie instead, killing her. Yet Hubert wouldn't have been a factor at all if Debbie didn't waste several minutes showing the rest of the family a slideshow of her prior conquests, buying Hubert precious time to break free from his crib and defeat Debbie. You were so close to winning, Deb. Number 7. Ernesto de la Cruz, Coco. Coco's Ernesto de la Cruz had basically won already. Years earlier, he poisoned his former bandmate Hector after Hector decided that he wanted to quit the band and move home. This, in turn, allowed Ernesto to steal his guitar and his songs, passing them off as his own and becoming a musical icon. But Ernesto made one huge mistake. He arrogantly decided to immortalize his crime in one of his films, which evidently causes Hector to both realize that he was murdered and that Ernesto was the culprit. And he would have almost certainly had no way to figure this out otherwise and therefore been forgotten to time, while Ernesto would have been celebrated as a legendary musician forevermore. Yet by gloating about his act in cinematic form, Ernesto teed up his own undoing, ensuring that both Hector and Miguel learned the truth, leading to the wider world also hearing about it. As a result, Ernesto was left disgraced with his legacy in tatters in both the land of the dead and the land of the living. Number 6. Castor Troy, Face Off. Face Off's psychopathic antagonist Castor Troy really had everything he needed to win. He'd swapped faces with FBI agent Sean Archer and had Archer's daughter Jamie held at gunpoint, ready to blow her away. But Troy made one huge mistake earlier on in the film, when he roughed up Jamie's lecherous boyfriend and gave her a butterfly knife to protect herself, whilst advising her to twist the knife when stabbing for added damage. And so when Troy has a gun to her head in the climax and is a second away from firing, she pulls out the knife and does just as he instructed. This leaves Troy massively vulnerable during the final shootout and speedboat chase with Archer, leading to his eventual demise by spear gun. Granted, Troy's plan became increasingly messy the moment he tried to assume Archer's life rather than simply flee to a country with no US extradition, but for all intents and purposes he would have also claimed his victory by just murdering Archer's daughter. Number 5. General Katana, Highlander 2: The Quickening. Now, Highlander 2: The Quickening is hardly a bastion of watertight storytelling or sturdy characterization, but even so, villain General Katana threw away an easy victory that he could have achieved by literally doing nothing and allowing nature to take its course. You see, Katana orders his two goons, Corda and Reno, to head to the future and kill Connor, to prevent him from usurping his plans on the planet Zeist. This is despite the fact that Connor is an extremely frail, mortal old man by this point, and Katana's goons remind him that he'll probably be dead within a matter of weeks, not to mention that Connor has no interest at all in returning to Zeist. Katana has none of it though, and repeats his order, which predictably results in Connor killing both Corda and Reno, and because Connor decapitates one of them, he regains his youthful vigor and immortality, setting him on a path to then kill Katana. Had Katana simply listened to his lackeys, he surely would have won by sheer virtue of his only prominent rival dying of old age a short time later. Number 4. Mrs. Tweedy, Chicken Run. For all intents and purposes, Chicken Run's crazed antagonist, Mrs. Tweedy, should have had an easy win on her hands here. After all, how much of a fight can a farm full of chickens possibly put up? Yet while getting a pie-making machine installed in the farm, Tweedy ignores the suggestion from her husband, Mr. Tweedy, that the chickens are organizing and plotting to overthrow them. Mrs. Tweedy simply dismisses her husband as an idiot and can't possibly entertain the idea that it's worth at least looking into what the chickens might be up to. Granted, in our own grounded reality, the idea of a chicken uprising does sound ridiculous, but dismissing Mr. Tweedy out of hand was a sublimely dumb move, as he of course turns out to be correct. But the hubby gets a somewhat satisfying comeuppance at the film's end, when his wife is foiled and he bluntly tells her, "I told you they were organised." Given that Mrs. Tweedy certainly had the vicious capability and the industrious mindset to operate a chicken farm, a little digging would have handed her the win on a silver platter. Number 3. Biff Tannen, Back to the Future. Granted, Marty McFly's real enemy in Back to the Future is definitely time itself, as he struggles to untangle his temporal meddling and ensure that his mother Lorraine and father George fall in love and later conceive him. Marty conspires to make an inappropriate advance on Lorraine at a school dance, giving George the opportunity to rescue her, but a spanner is thrown in the works when bully Biff Tannen intervenes, has Marty incapacitated and forces himself on Lorraine. George of course hadn't counted on having to actually fight Biff, and so Biff easily subdues him with an arm hold. His only mistake though, while spending around 20 seconds laughing and gloating with his back turned from George, giving George precious time to gather himself, clench his fist and knock Biff out. Had Biff just finished the job and knocked George out, George would have never had his big heroic moment and likely never gotten Lorraine to fall for him, in turn undoing Marty's existence. Number 2. Scar, the Lion King. And now we come to yet another classic Jeremy Irons villain who basically had won but ruined it all with a small yet significant act. In The Lion King, Scar successfully plots to have his brother King Mufasa killed, allowing him to ascend to the throne. For added measure, he even blames the accidental wildebeest stampede on Mufasa's son Simba, before then banishing him from the kingdom and ordering his hyenas to kill him. And so we come to mistake number 1, not killing Simba himself, or at least visually confirming Simba's death at the hyena's hands. This allows Simba to escape and eventually return to the Pride Lands as an adult. But even then, Scar still gets the drop on Simba during their final showdown, leaving Simba hanging off the edge of Pride Rock and seconds away from death. His next mistake? Well, admitting that he killed Mufasa, giving Simba the furious resolve to fight back and get Scar to admit to his act to the rest of his pride. Oh, and because Scar tried to blame it all on the hyenas, they refused to help him during the final fight and then rip him apart once he's banished from the Pride Lands. Had Scar just kept his bloody mouth shut and been a little more conscientious about dealing with Simba, his reign would have effortlessly endured unopposed. And number 1, Eric Quaylen, Cliffhanger. Cliffhanger's psychotic gang leader Eric Quaylen would have absolutely gotten away with his plan to steal $100 million from the US Treasury had he not absent-mindedly gotten a little loose-lipped. You see, his plan involves using mountain rangers Gabe and Hal as guides to track down 3 cases containing the money. But when Gabe climbs up the cliff face to grab the first case, he loudly tells his goons to kill him once he's handed the case over, noting that they don't need 2 guides to get the job done. Yet he stupidly says this in direct earshot of Hal, who immediately shouts the information up at Gabe, telling him not to come down. During the ensuing struggle to capture Gabe, an avalanche is triggered, killing one of his men and causing Quaylen to believe that Gabe is also dead. But in fact, he survives and goes on to eventually foil his plan.